It was during my mid-20s when I found myself reenacting much of the trauma and the dysfunction of my own childhood and adolescence. And the way it played out for me was I found myself forming attachments to women who were either disinterested or unavailable. Some were quite abusive. And for me, that elicited these excruciatingly painful fears of abandonment. And when the relationships sometimes crashed and burned, or there wasn't the reciprocation. And what made it worse is the fact that I didn't know how at that time to work effectively with my own emotions. And so, wanting these relationships to work, in many instances, I was avoiding or numbing myself at the same time. I was trying desperately hard to hold on to some women that were either not well matched for me or in some instances quite hurtful. But that in itself was a way of attempting to avoid the pain that I was holding within myself. Fortunately, I had an instinctive sense that I needed to dive into the depths of the pain. As I did so, there were times that I would go so deep into the fear of loss, the grief that I was feeling, and I would just breathe very softly, very deeply. At a certain point, I could feel this pain intensifying to the point that it was just all consuming, but then I would feel it break open and begin to come out of my body in waves. And that helped me to begin to break down or dissolve some of those unhealthy attachments and to let go. In addition to working with this practice, I began to work with a psychotherapist, and that helped me to gain an intellectual understanding of my emotional wounding. It wasn't actually healing the trauma or the deep emotional wounds that caused me to reenact these patterns, but I was willing to do anything that it took. I was willing to explore any practice or intervention that would facilitate the healing of these deep emotional wounds. I began to do lots of deep tissue body work. I worked with some extraordinarily powerful, gifted healers. Now, going back to my early 20s, I spent a few years training with Horace Daukei, one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. And when my mentor Horace would transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me, he would have me go on the vision quest, which typically entails going out to fast 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water.